So this is a PSA. If you're trying to get into tech right now, I really wouldn't recommend you get a comp sci degree or try to go to university. And I honestly wouldn't have said this a few years ago. This is very specific to 2024. I'm gonna go over 3 reasons on why I think getting a comp sci degree is gonna do you more harm than good right now. By the way, I've run a tech company for the past 7 years and interviewed over 1,000 software engineers. So the first reason is that it costs too much and it takes way too long. If you live in the US, you're looking at like an average about $80,000 to get a comp sci degree in 4 years of your life. And I don't think I need to say this, but like in this economy, you cannot afford $80,000 in 4 years of your life not making money. What you need to optimize for right now is bringing in as much money as you can in as little time as possible. And if you want to do that in tech, a comp sci degree is too long and it's going to cost you too much. The second reason is that a comp sci degree is actually not nearly as useful as you think it is on a resume. Unless you plan on building some real...
Hey guys, I'm just going to jump in real quick. Like he said, you need something that will give you quick money. Yeah, I think we all do. I don't think anybody, especially those that have lost their jobs, I don't think any one of them want anything that will take that long before they start making money. People need money right now, like yesterday, to be honest. So yeah, he's right about that. Let's keep going.
Complex shift for companies like Google and Amazon, which by the way are laying people off right now. It doesn't really matter where you went to school. The thing that employers care about the most is, are you able to get up and running and start making the money as fast as possible? And how they figure that out when they look at your resume is they're looking for, do you have previous experience in their business sector? So for example, if you're applying for a job at a supply chain tech company, they're going to look at your resume and see if you have previous experience at any other supply chain companies or building similar software. They don't care that you got a comp sci degree at XYZ university. It doesn't matter. That's not going to make the money. And the last and most important reason is that the skill set you acquire during a comp sci degree is entirely different than the skill set you need in a day-to-day work environment and when you're actually going out looking for a job. And this is super important because it makes you not very employable. You gotta remember, the person that is grading your performance in comp sci is a comp sci professor. They care about how clean your code is. They care about how performing your code is, how right you're doing something, how you wrote X, Y, and Z algorithm from scratch or understand the philosophy or the theory behind X, Y, and Z. Now, the person grading you in the job market is your boss, and your boss's job is to bring revenue to the company and to make money. And so suddenly, all those things that were important in comp sci are now no longer important in your day-to-day job. Doesn't matter how clean your code is, doesn't matter how performant it is. Can you build things at a fast pace that can make the company money? Yes or no? And so in that sense, paying $80,000 and spending 4 years of your life right now in this uncertain job market just to learn a set of skills that may not be fully transferable to get you a high-paying job just doesn't make sense to me. So you're probably asking yourself, okay, well, if I don't go to comp sci, what do I do then, Johnny? If you're curious, check out my profile. It's entirely dedicated to what you should be focusing on to improve or get into a tech career in 2024. Good luck.
Yes, guys, you got to be smart with what you're taking up in right now. I think trade is still the best thing to get into, things you can do with your hands. But again, that's just my own opinion. Let's check out the next video.
Do you remember all those techfluencers who were trying to convince you that if you learned how to code, that was your golden ticket to easy money and an easy job?
Did you know learning how to code is one of the most in-demand skills in the world? You have to start coding. If you're seeing this, you probably thought about coding before.
Right, the layoffs are already piling up this year.
With more layoffs just announced.
Last year, more than 250,000 jobs in the tech industry disappeared. From 2010 to 2022, we basically were living through a modern-day American gold rush, known as the tech industry. This is a map of Silicon Valley, and companies like Google, Meta, Uber, they were born during this time. And during that 2010 to 2022 timeframe, there was a lot of free money floating around that was helping to basically create and finance these businesses. And the reason why there was so much money was because interest rates were almost at zero. So it basically cost no money to borrow money. If you literally had any idea for an app, there was a good chance that you could probably find an investor to give you some money. Do you remember the con artist Anna Delvey? Well, her ex-boyfriend had this ridiculous app idea called a dream database, and he basically conned people into giving him money. He never made anything with that money. He basically stole it, and now he could never come back to the US. This is basically the time where we discovered how rich the rich could get. A lot of people were obsessed with Mark Zuckerberg. They heralded him as a genius. People admired him for creating Facebook, which was such a profitable company. And it wasn't until later, after much controversy, that now we're able to look at him critically. The same thing with Elon Musk. People were literally worshiping him. And he's always kind of been trolly, but after the whole Twitter X thing, public sentiment really turned on him. The reason why I bring this up is because during this time, tech CEOs could do no wrong. It wasn't until after the 2016 election that politicians and think tanks and professors and analysts were like, hey, are social media companies actually hurting society? And the media did a big part to create this mythic tech CEO fantasy. Basically, the tech industry and the media industry and everyone that was profiting off this industry was selling us this idea that the tech industry was the new way to achieve the American dream. And for some people, that really happened. Like for Mark Zuckerberg, he went from being rich to being incredibly filthy rich. And because these companies were so flush with investor cash, they were throwing out the most ridiculous salaries. Netflix at one point was paying software engineers over $1 million a year. I mean, it's actually really bizarre that we thought it was normal that engineers were making over $1 million a year. A rocket scientist makes around $100,000 a year. A pharmacist makes around $150,000 a year. Your primary care physician makes $180,000 a year. The salaries in tech were not normal, and it was 100% because of all the free money floating around. And guess what? It ran out. So you know the story. The Fed increased interest rates, right? They were trying to prevent the economy from crashing. Inflation was running rampant during the pandemic. It was a serious issue, and they had to raise our interest rates. And now, no one in America can basically buy a home. 2008. This is during the Great Recession. A lot of millennials are graduating college at this point. And people are getting terrible wages. Their salaries are stunted for years and years after this. And look what's really interesting about that line. This is interest rates at nearly 0%. And this is a time of great prosperity in the tech industry. This is when a lot of free money is being used by investors to put into startups and ideas, and this is a time of a lot of growth. The interest rates climbed back up slightly, and then again from 2020 to 2022, near zero. And this was a big hiring spree for tech. Now that it costs money to borrow money, investors are moving away from investing in risky things like startups, and they're putting them in blue chip companies. And tech companies started contracting. Mark Zuckerberg said that he was on a mission to basically fire managers who manage managers because he is interested in the year of efficiency, and the company is basically trimming the fat. I have told you a lot of stuff, and if you've made it this far, you are an incredibly intelligent and cerebral person, and I salute you. But the real question is, should you learn to code, even during this time of layoffs? And I would say yes, I know how to code. It's not my primary job, but it is incredibly useful. This is a list of the most popular languages that coders use right now. If you're going to learn a language, learn HTML, CSS, SQL. In fact, a lot of data is organized through SQL. We live in a digital world, and it is helpful to know what your world is built out of. I kind of think of knowing how to code kind of like when you watch any Star Wars movie and somehow everyone knows how to fix a plane. Very few things in life that are actually a sure thing, and the tech industry isn't really one of them.
Okay, news broke that eBay was laying off 9% of their workforce yesterday. And Brex laying off, I think, 20%. That all came in the same day. There have obviously been other layoffs as well. I've talked about it a bit. All this month, all in January. And so I got to thinking, how bad is January? How bad is this month? And so I went and looked at charts in layoffs.fyi because I'm a data guy. And there's two ways to read this, and I would be curious for your thoughts. The first way is the pessimist's way. It's where you look at the run rate we're at, right? We're about 2/3 of the way through January. You think, well, we're going to probably end up about 15,000. We're at 10,000 and change right now. That puts us right around May of 2023. That's our comp, right? That's the last time it was that high. in between, all those other months in between last May and now have been lower than that. And so you look at that, and it looks like a bit of a U-shaped pattern in the data. And so you can think to yourself, well, from a macro perspective, this could get a little bit worse because startups that need to raise and can't are going to have to let go of employees. That's one way to read that. There's a different way, though, and that's a little bit of an optimistic take. If you look at January and you say, we're going to end up at 15,000, and the correct comp, the correct comparison point is actually January of the prior year, it's looking way better. It's like 1/4 of where January ended up or less in 2023. Of course, that was a historically difficult month in tech. And that depends on how you read business cycles, and it depends on the macro environment. Because either you read the chart and you say, I think, the story in 2024 is going to be around startups going to the wall, and a lot of smaller scale startups will add up. Or you say, big companies tend to make cuts in January. That's when it hurts the worst. And yes, we'll continue to get a drip and drop of startups sort of having to hit the wall and let go of people through the year. It will be elevated versus 2010's levels. But it will decrease from January probably. And the fact that big companies making plans are doing their cuts now, and it's still, knock on wood, not anywhere close to January of 2023, is a good sign. I tend to read it as a good sign. I tend to read it the optimist way. I tend to say, look, most of those numbers are driven by big company layoffs, because just by definition, when they lay people off, they lay them off at scale. And so, like when eBay dropped 1,000 people, that's 10% of the number we've had so far this month from one company. You had similar huge numbers on Amazon and Google back in January of last year. You had Google laying people off this January already, also a fair number. So I read it as driven by these giant companies from a numbers perspective. And so I think it's likely that we will see a decline. I think it's likely that we will see fewer layoffs going forward in the rest of the year because they've done their thing. Now, I know that Google said there will be some impacts throughout the year. Yeah, but it won't be gigantic bunches of people in the same way. Like that's clearly the intent of that message, to say we're going to continue to look at right-sizing business units, but we're going to do that, and you're going to see effects hit individual teams, not effects hit entire business units in the same way. That's the optimist take. I think that's where I land. I think that is the most accurate read of the data. I would be curious for your perspective.